Hey, moon dancers. Today is a pretty powerful day. It is August 12th, 2026. We have a new moon. It's a total solar eclipse, and it officially opens the doorway into this eclipse season. There are seasons when life seems to move perfectly according to plan of everything that we've carefully laid out. And then there are eclipse seasons. This is times when something underneath the surface begins moving before the conscious mind has figured out exactly what's happening. I guess you could say, old skin starts to feel tight. Maybe something that once made perfect sense suddenly just doesn't. Emotions rise, relationships shift, desires change, and the body starts asking for something different. And it might be asking for a truth that we've been circling that becomes increasingly more difficult to ignore. And, there's really something here about eclipse seasons, and it's that they catalyze change. Eclipse season have a way of really kind of accelerating what has already been moving beneath the surface. A relationship may be ready to deepen or even ready to change. A new window may be opening while an old one closes. A part of us may finally be coming into its season to ripen and blossom. Well, maybe another part is ready to be released. And when that wave of change comes, we really have two choices, right? We can resist it or we can attune to it. And that is really the entire essence of this season. Not only the astrology of today's incredibly powerful new moon and total lunar solar rather eclipse, but this entire eclipse season through the lens of Western astrology, Vedic astrology, Ayurveda, yoga, Tantra, Kundalini, like how can we work with this energy? Because I don't think that the purpose of astrology is simply to tell us what's happening in the sky. I think it's more a great value that comes when it gives us another way of understanding what is happening within us. And perhaps the most important question of this eclipse season isn't what's going to happen to me. But maybe the better question is what is already happening within me that I'm finally ready to acknowledge? What is an eclipse? Great question. Before we move into the spiritual and astrological layers, let's actually ground into what is like physically happening. A solar eclipse occurs when the moon passes between the earth and the sun. So during a total solar eclipse, the alignment becomes so precise that the moon temporarily blocks the visible disk of the sun for those standing within the path of totality. You can think about how extraordinary that is, right? The sun is approximately 400 times larger than the moon, but it's also roughly 400 times further away from the earth. So, from our perspective, they appear almost exactly the same size in the sky. And for a few moments, the moon can cover the sun. Daylight changes, the temperature can drop, shadows change, animals can respond. The familiar rhythm of daytime is literally interrupted, and then the light returns. The sun never actually disappears, it was just simply obscured. There's something really incredibly beautiful about that metaphor because there are moments in our own lives when we can't see the light either. We can't see where we're going. We can't understand why something is changing. An identity no longer fits. But the next one hasn't really taken form yet. Something we've relied upon begins shifting. An old pattern comes roaring back to the surface. We know something is moving, but we can't quite name what it is. And maybe eclipse season is here to remind us that the light can still be there, even when we cannot see it. Remember, eclipses are catalysts. And for thousands of years, cultures around the world have regarded eclipses as really significant moments. They've inspired awe, fear, ritual, prayer, mythology, and spiritual practice. And within the Vedic traditions, especially, eclipse periods have long been treated as spiritually potent times for meditation, mantra, and inward practice. But I don't think we need to fear eclipse season. And I don't think every inconvenient thing that happens during these few weeks needs to become a cosmic omen. Instead, we can understand eclipses as thresholds, moments that invite us to pay closer attention. Because when change begins moving, they are really two ways that we can meet it. The first is resistance. We contract, we narrow, we cling to what's familiar, we try to keep everything exactly where it's been. We continue with business as usual, even when something deeper, this like deeper part of us knows that business is not very clearly not as usual anymore. And so the trouble is the change may happen anyway. We simply experience a lot more friction along the way. And now the second possibility is attunement. We become curious. We listen. We soften where we've been braced. We open where we've been closed. We notice where life seems to be asking something different from us. And instead of becoming passive recipients of change, we become conscious participants in it, co-creators. Instead of fighting against it, we become it. And that doesn't mean blindly moving forward after we have an emotion. It doesn't mean following every emotion. It doesn't mean burning your entire life down because you're having an intense eclipse week. It means and is really asking what is already changing? What wants to deepen? What is ready to end? And what is trying to emerge? Maybe eclipse season isn't creating things out of nowhere. Maybe it's simply illuminating what has been quietly asking for our attention all along. The August 12th new moon total solar eclipse. Let's begin with where we are today. August 12th, new moon, total solar eclipse. And depending on whether you're looking through the Western tropical astrology lens or the Vedic sidereal astrology lens, We receive two different but beautifully complementary stories. So according to Western astrology, this solar eclipse is in the sign of Leo, and so is the new moon. Leo brings us directly into the territory of the heart. Creativity, courage, visibility, leadership, self-expression, joy, play, life force, the willingness to occupy our own lives fully. But because this is an eclipse, we're not simply talking about shining brighter. We're also looking at the shadows surrounding visibility. Where are you seeking validation rather than trusting yourself? Where are you performing rather than expressing? Where have you built an identity around being liked, needed, approved, or recognized? And where have you made yourself smaller because being visible, fully visible, feels uncomfortable? And perhaps the biggest question here is who are you when you stop performing who you think you're supposed to be? That is an entirely different conversation about Leo because authentic Leo energy isn't necessarily loud. It doesn't require an audience. It's more the quiet certainty of, I know who I am. I know what matters to me. I know what makes me feel alive. And I'm willing to let my life reflect that. And from that place, creativity really becomes very different. Leadership becomes different. Relationships become different. The choices we make become different. We're no longer creating a life designed to prove something. We're creating one that actually feels alive. And so perhaps this Leo new moon isn't asking, what can I manifest? Maybe it's asking, what wants to be created through me right now? Well, this is a different kind of new moon. Normally, I love new moons for intention settings. What are you calling in? What are you creating? What seeds are you planting? But an eclipse new moon carries a very different texture. This isn't necessarily the moment to grip tightly around exactly what you think should happen next. Eclipse energy invites a little more space, a little more humility, a little more willingness to say, maybe I don't know yet. And that's okay. Sometimes the beginning is an ending. And sometimes a new path appears because an old one quietly disappears. And sometimes transformation doesn't require adding anything. Sometimes your next chapter begins when you finally stop forcing an identity that you've already outgrown. Well, according to Vedic astrology, this new moon solar eclipse is in Cancer and the nakshatra Ashlesha. And so here, the sun and the moon come together in Cancer, in the territory of Ashlesha Nakshatra, and this is where things get really beautifully deep. The symbol of Ashlesha is the coiled serpent. So immediately we enter the territory of what coils beneath consciousness. Think patterns, attachments, emotional entanglements, conditioning, inherited stories, hidden motivations, the behaviors we've repeated so many times that they started to feel like personality. Ashlesha doesn't necessarily ask us to look at what's obvious. It asks us to look underneath. Why do I keep doing this? Why does this situation keep circling back? What am I actually protecting? And what am I afraid will happen if I loosen my grip? And the serpent carries another incredibly important teaching. And that teaching is of shedding. A snake cannot continue growing indefinitely inside of the same skin. At some point, what once protected it becomes too small to contain what it's becoming. And I think that that's worth sitting with. What once protected you may eventually become too small to contain you. That coping mechanism, that identity, that relationship dynamic, that fear of being seen, that need to please, that need to control, that story about what you're capable of. It may have served you once. It may have genuinely helped you survive a particular chapter, but you have to ask yourself, does it still fit? And Cancer brings the conversation even deeper into home, nourishment, emotional security, family, belonging, and our inner foundation. So while Leo asks, who am I becoming? Ashlesha whispers, what am I willing to shed so I can become them? Now, Rahu and Ketu, this kind of eclipse axis, to really understand eclipses through Vedic astrology, we need to talk about Rahu and Ketu, which are the lunar nodes. So, astronomically, these are points where the moon's orbit intersects the apparent path of the sun. But symbolically, Rahu and Ketu tell one of the most fascinating stories about being human. Rahu is like hunger, more, next, become, acquire, experience, provide. If I could just have that, if I could become that, if I could accomplish that, then I'll finally be okay. Now, K2 moves in the opposite direction. K2 releases enough, finished, known, completed, let go. One pulls us toward experience, the other asks us to loosen our attachment to what we've already experienced. And eclipse season brings us right into that dance. We're always becoming and we are always shedding. We are reaching towards something new while simultaneously being asked to release something old. The spiritual work isn't choosing one over the other. It's learning how to participate consciously in both. Now, one of my favorite teachings of this season is to allow everything but follow nothing. Allow everything but follow nothing. Because eclipse periods can feel really loud. Emotions rise, old stories surface, the mind speeds up, and suddenly everything feels significant. What does this mean? Is this a sign? Should I leave? Should I stay? Should I start over? And suddenly you're 17 tabs deep into astrology trying to figure out what you're supposed to do with the rest of your life. Right? And this is where practice matters. Let the feelings come, but don't automatically chase the stories they provoke. Allow the emotion, allow the sensation, allow the thought, and allow the memory. Allow the uncertainty, but don't assume every thought needs to become a decision. And feeling can become completely real. The story the mind immediately attaches to that feeling may not. First, feel, witness, breathe, listen, then decide. And this is where yoga becomes so much more than movement. In the practice of yoga, you become the witness. And yoga gives us that practice of witnessing, observing the fluctuations of the mind without automatically becoming every thought that passes through it. Chitta Vritta Nirodha. It's in the sutras, stilling the fluctuations of the mind. Instead of asking, why am I feeling this? You can ask, can I feel this? Instead of immediately asking, what does this mean? Try asking, what am I actually experiencing right now? Instead of turning emotion immediately into action, can I breathe with it first? The practice becomes less about maintaining some perfect internal state and more about increasing our capacity to remain conscious inside an imperfect one. Sit, breathe, move, notice, return again and again and again and again. That is yoga. And this is why Kriya and Kundalini yoga can be such a powerful practice during times of transition, during these eclipse seasons, because Kundalini helps us to tune the human instrument. And within yogic and Vedic traditions, eclipse periods have long been treated as significant times for sadhana or a daily ritual practice, mantra, meditation, and inward practice. Traditional teachings sometimes describe practice performed during an eclipse as especially potent. Whether you understand that literally, energetically, symbolically, or spiritually, I think the teaching underneath it is really quite beautiful. When the outer light changes, turn toward the inner light. Ancient peoples around the world recognized that something extraordinary was happening when the shadow crossed the sun. The familiar rhythm of the sky changed, the daylight shifted, the natural world responded. And spiritually, these moments became thresholds, times to become still, to pray, to chant, to meditate, to listen. And you don't have to be standing underneath totality to work intentionally with the symbolism of this moment. Your practice becomes the place where you meet it. And the Kriya gives all of this energy somewhere to move through breath, movement, rhythm, mantra, mudra, concentration. And through all of this, we tune the human instrument. Because life is constantly playing with us. Relationships, parenthood, grief, joy, work, hormonal rhythms, creativity, fear, desire, loss, love, change. Our practice isn't designed to prevent life from touching the strings. It's how we continually retune ourselves so we can remain in relationship with life as it changes. The question isn't, how do I make sure nothing changes? The question is, how do I become steady enough to move without it changing? And really, rather, I guess more so the question would be, how do I become steady enough to move with what is changing? And Ayurveda really says that we must ground before you can expand. And so Ayurveda really walks into this entire cosmic conversation and offers something beautifully practical, and that is to ground. Periods of transition, irregularity, movement, stimulation, these all carry qualities associated with Vata dosha. Now, this is air and space. And Vata loves movement, travel, irregular schedules, information, stimulation, constant input. And when those qualities accumulate, we can become scattered, restless, overstimulated, disconnected from our bodies, unable to settle. So, Ayurveda gives us a very simple medicine for this eclipse season. And that medicine is rhythm. Eat warm, nourishing meals, drink warm liquids, keep your routine steady. Massage warm oil into your body, abhyanga. Spend time outside. Walk barefoot on the earth. Breathe slowly. Reduce unnecessary stimulation. Go the fuck to bed. Stay close to your rituals. And maybe stop consuming 17 different astrologers' interpretations of what's supposedly happening to you because information isn't always wisdom. At some point, we have to stop consuming and start listening. My teacher says we have to fast so we can digest what we feasted. So sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do during a cosmic portal is eat dinner and then go to bed. Now, Tantra offers another doorway into eclipse season. Can you stay open? The practice isn't necessarily about escaping intensity. It's about expanding our capacity to remain present with energy without immediately contracting around it. We tend to imagine spiritual growth as becoming increasingly peaceful, less affected, less emotional, less moved by life. But perhaps spiritual maturity isn't about feeling less. Perhaps it's about becoming capable of feeling more without abandoning ourselves inside the feeling. More joy, more grief, more uncertainty, more love, more pleasure, more fear, more beauty, more sensation, more life without immediately closing, without numbing, without controlling every wave. The practice becomes, can I stay open? Can I feel this without immediately trying to fix it? Can I experience uncertainty without demanding an answer? Can I let something change without deciding that change means something has gone wrong? This isn't a passive surrender. It's participation without the illusion of complete control. And that, my friend, is where co-creation begins. Here's a simple solar eclipse practice. So, what do we actually do with all of this? Honestly, you don't need an elaborate ceremony. You need enough quiet to hear yourself. So, start by creating some space. Maybe clean your practice area, light a candle, put your phone away, turn it on Do Not Disturb. And if it feels good, begin with abhyanga, a warm oil massage, and let that become an act of returning to your body. If you're in the heat of summer, coconut oil is absolutely perfect for abhyanga. And then after your beautiful, amazing self massage, move, shake, flow. Practice a grounding kriya. Let the body process some of what the mind has been carrying. And then practice Nadi Shodanan. This is alternate nostril breathing for anywhere from 3 to 11 minutes. Sit in meditation and don't demand an answer. Let yourself just witness. And if it feels supportive, you can work simply with the mantra Sat Nam. Truth is my identity. Let the repetition carry you beneath the identities you perform and more toward the truth underneath them. And then lie down, rest, receive. And as best you can, don't immediately grab your phone. Give yourself a few minutes where absolutely nothing needs to happen. Because ritual isn't meant to remove us from life. Ritual helps us return to life more awake. Now, this eclipse corridor, today, August 12th, opens the door, and then we enter the space between eclipses. August 28th closes this particular corridor with a lunar eclipse. And the space between can be really interesting. This is the liminal space. It's the hallway between the rooms. The old thing may already be loosening while the new thing hasn't fully revealed itself. And this isn't necessarily the moment to demand immediate answers. Instead, notice. Notice what repeats. Notice the conversations happening around you. Notice your dreams. Notice what suddenly exhausts you. Notice what gives you energy. Notice which relationships feel different. Notice what you crave. Notice what your body keeps trying to tell you. You don't have to make meaning out of everything. You don't have to decide everything. And you don't have to know what comes next. Just listen. On August 28th, the lunar eclipse is really when this kind of season is closed and the conversation starts to change, right? Today's August 12th eclipse is a new moon and solar eclipse, where the August 28th eclipse is a lunar eclipse bringing us into full moon territory. So symbolically, we move from beginning into culmination, from planting into revelation, from the dark moon into illumination. Something becomes visible, something reaches fullness, and something may be ready to release. Now, Western astrology, this lunar eclipse full moon on August 28th occurs in Pisces. And if today's Leo eclipse brings us the fire in the heart, Pisces takes us into the ocean. Surrender, intuition, imagination, spirituality, compassion, dreams, dissolution. Pisces asks a beautiful question. Can you let something end without turning it, like that ending, into failure? There are identities we outgrow, dreams that change, relationships that evolve, ways of coping that once protected us but eventually constrain us, beliefs that carried us through one chapter but cannot accompany us into another. And we don't have to villainize the person we used to be in order to become someone new. We can honor and thank and release and keep walking. So Vedically, the lunar eclipse full moon moves the conversation into the sign of Aquarius and the nakshatra of Shatabisha. And now this nakshatra carries a really beautiful association with healing, is sometimes translated in connection with 100 healers or 100 medicines, which creates an extraordinary bookend to Ashlesha. The first eclipse asks us to shed, the second asks us to heal. And healing doesn't always mean fixing ourselves. Sometimes healing becomes more intimate enough with ourselves that we stop abandoning ourselves when discomfort arrives. Now, Aquarius is the sign of expansion, and it expands the conversation beyond the individual. Right? It expands to the community, to the collective consciousness, the systems we participate in, the patterns we inherit, because our healing is personal, but it is rarely only personal. We inherit patterns, we absorb cultural conditioning, we repeat family dynamics, we participate in collective rhythms. And when one person begins living differently, something within the pattern changes. Which brings us to the two most powerful questions of this entire eclipse season. What ends with me, and what begins through me? What is already changing in my life, and where and why am I resisting it? What identity, pattern, or attachment has become too small for who I'm becoming? Where am I seeking validation instead of trusting that I know in my own heart? What wants to be created, expressed, or lived through me right now? What am I ready to stop carrying into this next season of my life? And if I become a conscious co-creator in this change, what would I choose next? And then come back to these two questions. What ends with me, and what begins through me? You do not have to know what's next. Maybe this is one of the greatest teachings of the eclipse season. We are so quick to want the revelation, the answer, the new plan, the next identity. We want to know exactly why something is happening and exactly where it's taking us. But transformation contains a middle, right? The snake loosens the old skin before it fully emerges from it. The seed splits underground before anything reaches the surface. And today, the moon literally moves between us and the sun. And for a moment, the light disappears and then it returns. The sun was never gone, it was obscured. And maybe there's something in that for us. You may not see the entire path. You may not know exactly who you're becoming. And you may feel the old skin loosening without knowing what life feels like outside of it. You may know something is ending without understanding what will replace it. You do not have to rush. You do not have to force clarity. You don't have to manufacture a giant new moon intention simply because it's a new moon. Instead, you can listen, you can practice, you can breathe, you can move, you can nourish yourself. Feel what is here and let the shadow reveal what it has come to reveal. And when the mind starts demanding that you figure out the entire next chapter, return to the breath in front of you. And remember, allow everything but follow nothing. Let yourself shed. Let yourself listen. Let yourself change. Let yourself be changed. Because eclipse season doesn't require us to predict the future. It asks us to become present enough to participate in our own becoming. Maybe something is ripening. Maybe something is ending. Maybe something you've carried for years is finally light enough to put down. Maybe something you haven't even imagined yet is beginning to emerge. And maybe you don't know yet. And that is okay. The change may already be happening. The invitation is to meet it. Not passively, not fearfully, not gripping so tightly that we exhaust ourselves trying to hold the ocean still, but awake, intentional, present, a conscious participant in whatever comes next. And perhaps when the old skin finally falls away, you'll realize you weren't losing yourself at all. You were simply releasing enough of what wasn't you to recognize yourself again.